Hey guys, this is Tom here from Metalloud. This is part 2 of our Chariot Review Series, where we're teaming up with Sean Gonzalez, and we are going to be going through every single Chariot album ever released. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Fiancee, which is their second album. This one came out in 2007, so it makes it about 8 years old now. Some of the complaints we had about their first album were the fact that the song titles were kind of weird. It kind of felt like they were just not sure what they were doing, where they were going. It was a very heavy, oppressive album, very kind of raw. The Fiancee is more straightforward metalcore. It's a lot smoother. It's still heavy on the heavy side, but it definitely feels like they branched out a lot more. It doesn't feel like you're being, crushed by this album.
And the Chariot really continued their antics on this album in kind of being that weird stepbrother of metalcore.
It's also kind of where they start to develop their style that we've come to know. This is kind of where we get some, decent Chariot songs. For instance, the song "And Shot Each Other," which may sound like a weird title, "And Shot Each Other," but in the context of things, if you actually read the titles of the album,
based off this old nursery rhyme that's kind of very contradictory in context. Back to back, they faced each other. They drew their swords and shot each other. The deaf policeman heard this noise, then came to kill the two dead boys. So it's got this kind of, Yonkers, Tyler the Creator feels to it. I hate that I just made that reference. Where every single line kind of contradicts the first one. It's like a paradox.
And back to "And Shot Each Other," it's kind of the first song I feel like where you kind of get elements of the Chariot. It's kind of just off the wall. It's crazy. There's some the beginning of it's completely different from what it turns into.
"And Shot Each Other" is probably one of the better songs.
And then you have the end of it, which is almost like theatrical.
That song, seeing it live at Warped Tour, was really cool because it starts off with this very vicious, hardcore sound, and then Scoggin lets out this crazy scream building up to it, and the ending is kind of this weird, anthem. And I just remember the Chariot, and that Josh was holding a flag as this, weird choir's coming over. He's holding this flag and just shaking it around and saying "Long Live," which became a part of the Chariot as their albums continued to grow. Then Came to Kill had Hayley Williams from Paramore on it in this very weird, eerie tone because, she took one take and just kind of sang, and she didn't really know what she was getting herself into.
It's just that this album is straight metalcore. It's not really, there's really few risks that they take on this.
And while it does feel polished, I really like this album because it is more raw in terms of, Scoggin really just is an unrelenting force. He's all over the place. He's screaming like a madman. And it really starts off with Back to Back. He just blows his, he lets his voice really just come out. The trumpet's probably one of my favorite songs, even though it has nothing to do with the Chariot. It's just this really cool choir hymn. And, I like playing it on drives and long drives, especially when I reach my destination and I can just, step outside the car and be like, my Chariot made it.
It's not as, in mathcore, they kind of haven't really truly started exploring the odd time signatures that they kind of develop in their follow-ups. This is still a good album. It's a little just too straightforward. It's probably one of the more accessible albums that they have, which for the Chariot, that's kind of saying a lot.
I do agree that this album's more accessible, but what I enjoyed more about it was that it took, the parts from the first album, which I'm not going to say the name of, and brought them out into more of a focus, more of the scope of what the Chariot would kind of drive themselves into.
I don't really hate this album, but I don't particularly like it. It's kind of one I would say it's kind of easy to get into for a lot of people. It's got elements of mathcore, but it's not quite there.
This was the first Chariot album I actually heard, and I liked it because at the time I was listening to bands like Let Live and more of that spastic, you don't really know what's going to happen. And the Chariot kind of wore this at this time frame in 2007.
It's got elements of metalcore, straight metalcore. It's coming in there. It's got a lot going for it. It's just not my particular favorite Chariot album. It's still kind of got that same criticism I had about the first album, where it still doesn't feel like they're not sure where they're going with this album, whether they want to do something different, or whether they want to be a kind of straightforward metalcore band, whether they want to be extremely heavy, or whether they want to incorporate, different elements into it.
In terms of Chariot albums, I actually like this one. I kind of adore it as an album that I can listen to and not necessarily have to try and understand, which became kind of it was a nice thing. It felt like background noise with some really damn good hardcore riffs.
And it's not indicative of what we've come to expect from the band. And it's decent. It's a decent release. There's nothing particularly glaringly wrong with it. Just again, not really my favorite.
Stay tuned next time as we talk about wars and rumors of wars in the Chariot the series.